Masculinities in Pacific Government's agenda for gender equality. I just want to talk very briefly on three things. One is the global mechanisms for gender equality and the question of where are the men. And I think some of the speakers this morning were sort of mentioned that. The second one is engaging men in gender equality campaign, specific focus on discourses on violence. How's that going? How's it working out or unfolding for the Pacific? How are we dealing with the issue of engaging men in the campaign? And the last one is how are we dealing with the changing nature of masculinities? Is it an added sort of a challenge to policy makers, a challenge to our leaders and Pacific communities in general? So those are the three sort of key things that I'm going to focus on. As we know, equality between women and men is recognized as a principle in the international law articulated in many United Nations documents from the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights onwards. And the idea that men and boys have a specific role in realizing this principle has only been articulated in recent years. Issues about gender equality were placed on the public agenda, of course, by women mainly. The reason is quite obvious. It is women who are disadvantaged by the main patterns of gender inequality. Therefore, it sort of makes sense for women to fight for that. And this logic is so strong that gender issues have been widely regarded as women's business and of no concern to men and boys. But a lot of scholars believe that this particular claim or point of view can no longer be completely relevant. So most policy discussions over the last 2 decades since the Beijing Platform for Action adopting a gender perspective largely means addressing women's concerns. Again, speakers this morning referred to that. And this is understandable given the main pattern of gender inequality and was the only way by which gender issues could come to the public agenda. But it has also some consequences which create challenges now, and hopefully I'll come to that a bit later on. In international and regional and national gender equality policy documents, women are by and large the subjects of policy discourses. So for documents like Beijing Platform for Action, I mentioned earlier, the Beijing Plus 20 outcome document, and even our own Pacific document, the revised Pacific Platform for Action. Of course, men are rarely explicitly named or concretely discussed. And if they are present in the background, they're sort of like, if they are present, they're sort of like implied in these documents. Their existence, they just exist as sort of background players. So this is a key challenge, a question for our policy makers in the region. How do we bring in the men to engage in especially gender equality strategies like the fight against violence against women? And of course, speakers this morning referred to HIV and AIDS, health issues concerning women, but the implications on the health of men as well is sort of missing from policy discussions. At the national level, the agencies or meetings which formulate or implement the policies usually have names referring to women, Ministry of Women and Children, Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty, Women, Children and Community Development. So, that sort of has the emphasis of policies have always been on the women and ignoring the men. As we know, most Pacific Island countries have signed the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And for 20 years now, you know, a lot of our policies have been driven by the Beijing Platform for Action. That document, our own Pacific document, has been derived from that. And our own leaders, Pacific Forum leaders, in 2012 approved or endorsed the document, a very special document to most women feminists in the region and gender specialists, and that is the Pacific Leaders Gender Equality Declaration, so also called a pledge acronym. So that was a key a milestone for the region. The RPPA, the Platform for Action for us, and the Leaders Declaration for Gender Equality, those are like the two main ones. What's important, just before last week, as some of you might know, there was a huge conference of Pacific women here in Suva, the Pacific Women's Triennial Conference, and that was to revise the revised Pacific Platform for Action. So it's been revised like 3 times. And that's, the revisions are basically needed because of different issues. So in the first one, there were like 13 issues of critical concern, and then they were like grouped together in another sort of 6 main categories. And now I think they are sort of working on the last, the most recent revision of it. And there will be different issues as well. So climate change is a key issue now. Women's health continues to be a main one. Education is a main one, and of course domestic violence is another key issue that's never going away. So the discourses on men and violence, we know that it's basically been about hegemonic masculinity, how that is harmful to women, but the question also of how that is harmful to other men, or you know what some speakers before me sort of referred to as marginalized, is it marginalized or subjugated, suppressed men. So I think a lot of it too is the work of Penny in Samoa and in other Pacific countries is to do with development studies, and a lot to do with work that's driven by the aid donors in the Pacific. We have all these global documents, and they sort of trickle down to our region and then to our individual countries. What I want to end my presentation with is the involvement of men in the fight against discrimination of women, and also the involvement of what to do, what governments are to do with the other men or the suppressed men, those who are discriminated against within this sort of hegemonic, what you call heterosexual sort of composition of men. Within that, there's a lot of diversity. So we have, for example, in Samoa, the Fa'afafine, and in other places like Tonga, they have their own term for those. So it's the challenge now for our governments is to not so much for the government only to work on those, how to recognize, how to understand more the interests and the needs and of these groups, but also how to work with the church, how to work with NGOs and civil society groups, how to work with local communities, and that's a multi-sector kind of approach, because in any policy, and specifically on gender equality, the government is seen as the driver of it in terms of implementing and monitoring, evaluating the processes. But we tend to forget about the role that's played by the church as well, and religion, and in terms of the communities, there's still what you call disconnection. There is disconnect between getting to our local communities, and especially the rural ones, to sort of be more active in bringing in in enforcing policies on gender equality. But also we still have the religion and the church as well, sort of a bit not knowing about its own position in how to deal with the behaviors of the men and behaviors of women who are also perpetrators of violence. So, so for me, it's a issue of policy. It's a big thing, because for the Pacific, it's an interesting one, because it's not only you have the pressure, if you like to call it that way, from the global community, but you also have the pressure within your own communities, local communities, because there's resistance, there's institutional resistance to the whole call of to bring about gender equality, and there is, of course, the diversity of groups. There's not just one group of men who are sort of, supporting, not so much supporting, but believe in this religious sort of driven belief that, men are the heads of households and therefore leaders and all that, and they can do whatever they want in their households, in their villages, and as we see in things like violence against women and children. So for me, the challenge for our leaders is to put into policy document how to, to understand the lives, the diversity, the lives of different men out there, how to involve more men in our campaign against violence against women, and of course in gender equality mechanism overall, and of course to bring about and to deal with the dialoguing and the pressure from the global communities. So that's it, basically. Yeah, so any questions? That's welcome.
Fundamentally, within these meetings, there's one perspective, or one track perspective. Gender is about women and their needs.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
There's no concern about men and their needs. That just was not the focus. It's about women and their needs, and that was the essential and fundamental focus in that meeting. And I sort of sat there, I was thinking about raising issues about men and some of the transgender, but I got the feeling that if I do that, if I bring this up in this place, I might not leave here alive. I might not leave here alive. So someone has got to get the message to some of these folks who are making these decisions that gender goes beyond just women and their needs, right? I mean, that's important, but that's the sort of central and essential focus. And I kind of get it. I know the funding is probably driven by that, right? These people are funding, these are funding organizations, and they make decisions based on what they can get funded. But in the process, there are a lot of groups out there who need some help, who are not yet doing. So the issue is, how do we sort of change that perspective, make them understand that there are other groups out here who need some help.
More research.
Yeah.
Challenge for this group. A lot of research topics.
Just in terms of engaging men, so my comment is around that. As you know, like from my experiences working in the Pacific and elsewhere, a lot of the time what happens, the aim is to have women's knowledge, women's experiences, women's realities, and their leadership that guide the process in terms of framing gender equality and guiding policy making and so forth. So I think that when we do talk about involving men and in the whole discourse, we should also be conscious about how women are placed in this discourse and how they're engaging in this discourse. My question is, the question now is around programs like, and a lot of CSOs do this, governments do this, and not only in Fiji, intergovernmental organizations also do this, including the UN, is campaigns in terms of advocacy, awareness, around violence, and they perpetrate a lot of masculinity, like a lot of toxic masculinity by the use of words such as real men, men up, Mard, which is a Hindi word, means men, but it has the whole mustache and all the nuances of masculinity, and it is an international advocacy campaign supported by the UN. So like, how do we change the narrative around this? Because it keeps on gaining. So you don't see it reducing, even though we do talk about it in silence here and there, that it does perpetuate a lot of toxic masculinity around this, and it doesn't really express the binary because it again talks about the real man, manning up. So how, in terms of policy transformation, how do we change this narrative? How do we shift this discourse?
What seems to be working now is a multi-approach to issues, meaning multi-sectoral approach to issues, and I think that's what I mean by involving everybody, including the faiths, the religious groups, and NGOs, and even the aid donors, even our governments. I think generally in the Pacific, people respect what the government says, and I think partly because of our respect for authority and all that, and I think it's a multi-sectoral approach that might be effective. It's just started in parts of the Pacific, still struggling. There are still issues, but
This is a while ago now, almost 20 years, that was done for the World Bank, and the study we came out with was rejected then by the World Bank. They didn't like our conclusions, but they did allow us to publish it with Oxfam, which was nice of them, considering they didn't like the study. They expected us to, and it was about men and development, and they expected us to attack the feminists and to just say it's men's turn for some of those development dollars and funding and whatnot. One of the most interesting things we found was that on an international scale, the development agencies were extremely nervous about involving men, about the move from women in development to gender and development. The international agencies were much less enthusiastic about involving men. The further down we went in terms of organizations and individuals, and we did countries all over the world, the more people said it's very important that women not lose the decision-making capacity. It's very important that women not lose financial control over situations. But that said, how can you not involve men if you're talking about violence, for instance? That unless we find ways, we're not going to address that problem sufficiently. And so the further down we got, and the further away from sort of the people who were looking at everything on a very high level, it became very clear that there are a lot of challenges, but that it was absolutely essential to find ways to do that. And it would vary from place to place and issue to issue, but taking into account some of those things.
This now UN just started. In fact, it started in last year, but there's an ongoing discussion now on involving championing men leaders for gender equality, and that has come from the UN. So there's a Facebook thing on all of that, and blog and everything. So you get all these top men from the UN system, and even I think there's a rep from World Bank as well. So they are seen as champs for gender equality, and that's quite good because people will see that it's coming from the top instead of before it was like men against violence in the villages, and So if it goes both ways, I think we should be seeing some.
That's progress.
Yeah, it is.
So.
Yeah.
Just she was talking about cross-sectoral, and the first ever cross-sectoral was we organized between the faith-based and churches in 2016 here in Fiji with all the human rights agencies, civil society organizations, and the faith-based agencies, churches here. It was held at the Forum Secretariat, and we organized that. And that kind of led to other things that developed later on. So like Richard and I have actually been involved in some of these, that light the flame for much more closer working relationship between some of these human rights-based agencies and faith-based organizations. Richard and I were invited by RRT, SPC, to talk about human rights and theology. That then led to others in Nandi. For the first time also, RRT organized this human rights tradition and the faith-based tradition coming together regionally in Nandi, making the connection between faith-based traditions and human rights traditions. Most recently, I was in Vanuatu with the Vanuatu Christian Council, where all the churches came together specifically to look at the family protection legislation of Vanuatu, involving the churches in the review, because that is coming up for review this year, and how the faith-based organizations and churches can actually actively participate in the review of the Family Protection Act of Vanuatu. And so we have made some headway, and Richard is here, he can confirm that we've been involved in the cross-sectoral already, and because we believe that's the way to go to address, because churches, whether we like it or not, they form more than 90% of the populations of the Pacific. They are a very big player, and we have to bring them on board, not only on board, but to be able to swing around the tide of theologies and interpretations that have been predominant these past years, and to change that towards, not just it, but, human religion. So I just wanted to say that we have actually been doing quite a fair bit of cross-sectoral work with human rights and civil society organizations. Thank you.
Before we move to Adnan, I think I would just say, one area of research that might be important given the discussion that's happening is who are the stakeholders or actors involved in trying to direct change, at what levels, and what are the dynamics between the relationships with the communities with it, and who's driving that, and what are the outcomes of it, how is it being perceived, what are the responses to it. I think are probably areas we need to explore more, like how are these efforts perceived by people, for example, whether certain ideas are coming in more easily or not, what's driving that, I think are important questions to probably explore in terms of getting more empirically driven understanding of what's happening with masculinities, who's defining what it should be or so on. So that's maybe a question to keep in mind.